A few years ago, our family went to dinner at Moe's. We walked in, stood in line, and sitting at the booth to the left was one of Henry's teachers. She's eating with her husband and her kids. You would have thought Henry had a stroke. He went limp, burying his face in my chest. The teacher tries to say hi, but Henry doesn't move. I shake hands with the husband, and Henry slaps my hand away. He doesn't know what to do. His worlds are colliding. It's uncomfortable. It's weird. His clearly defined worlds of school and then home are getting grayer and more confusing as the moments pass. Until at last he pulls it together, reluctantly offers a smile, high-fives one of the daughters. I tickle him to make him laugh, and we say goodbye to order our food. By the skin of his teeth, Henry escapes a traumatic moment. The shock of his two worlds colliding. Up to this point, it had never dawned on him that his teacher doesn't live at school and that she also has a family and perhaps goes out to eat at the same restaurants as him. And now his world has changed forever. He's now left to make sense of all of this. This happens often for kids, and apparently it doesn't get any easier as adults. I mean, just look at the story of Pentecost in Acts 2. It is the ultimate story of worlds colliding. 50 days after Passover stand all members of the Jesus movement. They are few in number and weak in voice. But out of the clouds come roars of sound of violent winds. Flames of all sizes appear to spread from one apostle to another. One by one, they speak the languages of every tribe. One by one, they get the attention of the people. One by one, they talk about God's power and draw a crowd to hear God's message. These intrepid disciples inaugurate that the Spirit promised is now the Spirit provided. And it gets weird for the people who are there. Worlds collide in unimaginable ways. I mean, listen to how Scripture depicts this story, verses 5 through 12. Now there were devout Jews from every nation under heaven living in Jerusalem. And at the sound, the crowd gathered and was bewildered, because each one heard them speaking in the native language of each. Amazed and astonished, they asked, "Are not all of these who were speaking Galileans? And how is it that we hear each of us in our own native language? Parthians, Medes, Elamites, and residents of Mesopotamia, Judea, Cappadocia, Pontus, Asia, Phrygia, Pamphylia, Egypt, and the parts of Libya and beyond the Cyrene, and visitors from Rome, both Jews and proselytes, Cretans and Arabs, in our own languages. We hear them speaking about God's deeds of power." All were amazed and perplexed, saying to one another, "What does this mean?" Did you catch what Scripture says that are on the lips of the people? They were amazed and perplexed. The worlds of all the people present are colliding, and they don't know how to manage it. Their defined worlds were getting grayer and more confusing as every moment passed. And their worlds I'm talking about is their understanding of heaven and earth. Unconscious people think heaven and earth are separate entities. It's not because they're ignorant, they just don't think about it. We're here on earth, and when we die, we go to heaven, somewhere else, a different world. Now, theologian N.T. Wright says, in the first century, just as people in the 21st, people thought these two worlds were supposed to stay firmly and safely apart. We live on earth. God lives in heaven. We hope there may be some commerce between the two, and indeed we have special places that allow for this. In ancient Israel, the place of that commerce was, of course, the temple, the spot where heaven actually overlaps with earth. And the temple functioned to the rest of Israel rather like a fireplace functions in a living room. The place where that which is normally dangerous can safely be located and dealt with. N.T. Wright picks up on what we're talking about here with this image of a fireplace. The fireplace provides warmth and light to the room while being in a safe spot. It's one world, and we live safely in another. The temple was the same for the Israelites. It's the place where you manage one world, coming in contact with the other. It's dangerous in there, but it's controlled. And this is the problem with Pentecost. It's like seeing your teacher at Moe's, but multiplied by 1,000,000,000. At Pentecost, tongues of fire touch down, not on the temple, not on the priests going about their normal activities, not in the fireplace, but it lands on people everywhere. The fire has leapt out of the fireplace and is setting light to the rest of the world. And this is exactly the point of Pentecost. At Pentecost, dramatic temperatures rise. Tornadic sounds and flaming sights and inspired utterances are made by each and all. And this is God's intent. Christianity is meant to escape the fireplace flickering in the upper room, and it's meant to be unmanageable and uncontrollable. This bustling public affair is supposed to attract the attention of representatives from every tribe and every nation. For God's not hiding in alleyways and upper rooms anymore. In Acts 2, God's loosed in the world, and heaven and earth are no longer separate. These worlds are colliding. Pentecost means that heaven has now become unleashed. It's spreading like fire, out from within the fireplace, now spreading across boundaries and languages and cultures and dreams, and we're left like children trying to make sense of it all. And 2,000 years later, we're still making sense of it. So let me help. Using the framework of our sermon series, which has been our theological lens for the past 2 months, try thinking about Acts 2 in the light of consciousness. Pentecost is the ultimate rise in consciousness. And conscious people see that the two worlds, heaven and earth, they aren't separate. They're one and the same. Jesus ascended from this earth, and then the Spirit replaced him, and it has never left. People who rise in consciousness realize this. The same Spirit is still loosed on earth today, and we collide up and against it all the time. Whether we realize it or not, the Spirit of the Lord is upon us, moving and shaping the world around and within us. Conscious people see this. Unconscious people miss it. They move on with their day without a thought of it. Now, some even pine for it, not even realizing it's right there. Conscious Christians, though, the kind that I want you to be, understand that God's Spirit is here, in front of us, around us, inside of us. Heaven is on earth. Access to the divine is right in front of us. And if we want to be people who spread this truth, who speak this truth, inviting others into this truth, having the world see this truth and hear this truth, then we must become conscious to it in our world. Look at verse 17. In the last days it will be, God declares, that I will pour out my Spirit upon all flesh, and your sons and your daughters shall prophesy. Your young men shall see visions, and your old men shall dream dreams. Even upon my slaves, both men and women, in those days I will pour out my Spirit, and they shall prophesy. In verse 21, then everyone who calls on the name of the Lord shall be saved. This is the message of Pentecost. The Spirit dwells among us, and there's no going back. Thanks be to God.